Hi everyone, so in this video I will be describing my leadership style, and to begin I will use my DISC assessment to go over some skills and traits. So as you can see from this chart, I scored pretty high on my stabilizing and cautious behavior styles. I fall somewhere in the middle for my interaction style, and I scored somewhat low for my decisive style, but overall I would say this assessment was pretty accurate. So just digging a little further into each behavior style, I did identify a couple of skills and traits that are true to my leadership style. For example, looking at my stabilizing behavior style, I think I possess good listening skills. For example, when I work in a team, I always make an effort to actually hear and pay attention to others' ideas. And when I think about environments that make me feel comfortable, I prefer to be in an environment where there's a level of structure and order to it. For my cautious behavior style, I agree that when I present an argument, I do so logically and based on facts, and I try not to let my emotions get in the way. And I also agree that if there are rules, standards, or protocols set in my environment, I will usually try and follow them down to the T. Looking at my interactive behavior style, when I meet new people or am approached with a new idea, I tend to need time to warm up to them or reflect on the situation before I jump to any conclusions. And lastly, for my decisive behavior style, like I said before, I like to have standardized rules and protocols for guidance. I also tend to avoid confrontations with others through open communication. And I also like to evaluate every possible solution and scenario before jumping to any conclusions or making any decisions. So based on this quarter's discussion on different leadership styles, the leadership style I think I most identify with is authentic leadership. And just learning more about authentic leadership, the book mentioned that there's 4 components to this style, which I feel I most relate to. So the first component is self-awareness, and I believe I have good insight on my skills, strengths, weaknesses, goals, and who I am as a person. I'm also good at reflecting on my core values, motives, and just trusting my own gut feelings. And overall, self-awareness is about having a clear sense of who you are and what you stand for. The next component is internalized moral perspective, and I believe this also applies to me in that in any setting, I base my actions on my morals, values, and what I think is right and acceptable instead of following the crowds. I also think this is an important component because it allows me to lead by example. So I know that when I'm doing the right thing, others can take on to that and do the same thing. The third component is balance processing, and this involves being open about your perspective, but also being objective and considering others' views. Whenever I find myself working in a group setting, I always take time to formulate my own thoughts and opinions before I make a decision. However, I also value others' opinions, especially if it contradicts my views. And I feel like this is very important to do because it fosters growth between both individuals. The last component is relational transparency, and this involves showing others who you truly are as a person. I think that when I work in a group setting, I'm pretty open as to what are my strengths and weaknesses, how I approach certain things, and how I interact with others. And I think this helps others see that I'm an honest person and that I'm not trying to be perfect and that I always have room for growth. And I think that as a leader, this is an important trait to display because it can allow you to form trusting relationships with your followers and also lead you to develop more of like a mentor relationship with them. So these 4 factors form the basis for authentic leadership. The book, however, also mentions other factors that influence this leadership style, which includes positive psychological attributes, which means having optimism and resiliency when placed in difficult situations. So during tough situations, I always have hope that things will get better, but I also actually push myself to find those solutions to make that happen. The next factor is reasoning skills. And like I said before, when it comes to making decisions, I always follow my values and what I stand for, while at the same time taking into consideration how my decisions affect everyone else. The last factor are critical life events. So when I do something wrong or make a mistake, I don't dwell on the situation or put myself down for it. Instead, I use those situations as learning opportunities to become a better version of myself. One example where I used this leadership style was when I used to volunteer at White Memorial Medical Center as a clinical care extender. And during that time in the program, I was on the telemetry unit for about 2 rotations. And I remember that they were starting to bring in new volunteers. And they assigned me to volunteers so that I could show them how the unit worked and what kind of things they would be doing. And when I first met them, I remember that they were really nervous. They had questions as to how to best interact with patients. And overall, they were just really worried that they were going to do something wrong. And I think at that moment, I really displayed and took on that authentic leadership role. I remember I had a conversation with them where I reassured them that everything was going to be fine. I told them that I knew exactly how they were feeling because I was in their shoes a couple months ago. And I also shared with them some of the experiences I had on the floor so they could be more aware of the right thing to do in those situations and also for them as a way to learn from my mistakes. I also explained to them that even though I had been on the floor for a couple months, there was always new things that came up, and if you don't know the answer to something, the best thing you should do is just ask for help. And I think by me kind of sharing my experiences and being open with them, it allowed them to understand that it was okay not to know everything at that moment. And it also allowed them to connect with me and feel more comfortable coming to me with any questions they had. And I think it also helped foster that mentor relationship that I mentioned before. So, looking at the strengths of this leadership style, I think authentic leadership validates that you should be true to yourself and what you stand for. So, when others see that you stick to your values and they see someone who is trustworthy and confident in themselves. Another strength is that this leadership style promotes you to be transparent and open, for example, about your strengths and weaknesses. And I think this is a strength because it can foster relationships and connections with your followers. I think with this generation of millennials, maybe taking on more of that mentor role can be beneficial for followers. The weaknesses for this leadership style kind of contradict the strengths. For example, while I think being transparent and being open is a good trait of a leader, I think it could also be a drawback. Followers may start to think that the leader can be unqualified for a certain position, and I think there should be some kind of leader and follower professional boundary. Another thing is that this leadership style suggests that leaders should consult with followers before making a decision. And although I think that's important as well, I think leaders should be capable of making their own decisions while taking into consideration the greater good of the group. So, when taking into consideration different environments and scenarios, I think my leadership style does change. Everything from my assigned role and responsibility to the situation and the people involved influence my leadership role. For example, during undergrad, I used to work in the accreditation department for the College of Business. So I dealt with keeping professors' information up to date, and I proctored and graded exams for grad students, and I also worked on other projects to make sure the university stayed accredited. Later on, I was also in charge of training incoming workers, and I find that I would use a coaching approach with them. This involved me using high directive and high supportive behaviors. For example, I would assign the new workers individual specific tasks and set like a timeline for them to complete it by, so there was definitely expectations they had to meet. However, I also would check in on them to see if they had any questions, and I would sometimes stay after work with them to see if they needed help with anything. On the other hand, in different situations, I believe I can also employ a supporting approach or delegating approach. Going back to my volunteer example, as the volunteers became more familiar with the unit, they didn't require my help as much as they did in the beginning. So towards the end of my rotation with them, I provided them with less and less input because I saw that they were becoming more confident and they were able to problem solve on their own. So at that point, I felt like my job was done since they were capable of doing things on their own. So my vision statement goes as follows. I am strong, passionate, and driven to achieve any task put in front of me. I will strive to care for and make my family proud. I want to excel in my career by becoming a practitioner that takes on challenges and one that advocates for the power of occupation. I will display honesty, will always believe in my abilities, and will push for a better version of myself. I will choose to live a life where risks are encouraged and mistakes are opportunities for growth. My life will have meaning and purpose by positively impacting the lives of others. My vision statement relates to my leadership style and that I truly care about leaving a positive impact on others, whether they be my future clients or the people I end up working with. I want others to feel like they are capable of doing anything they want. I know sometimes I need to push to take on risk and challenges, but I know that in the end, that's what's going to make me a better person and a better practitioner in the future. So as I enter the field and gain more experience, I hope to instill that confidence in others as well. My first goal is that after 3 years of practicing as an occupational therapist, I will develop and implement one program in the organization or setting I work in. This program will focus on the needs of the population I end up working with, applying the concepts of treatment planning to a larger context. So some activities and actions to achieve this long-term goal include finding a mentor. So during my first year working as a new graduate, I hope to find someone who is willing to provide guidance and someone who has knowledge on program planning, development, implementation, and evaluation. I can identify a need or problem with the population I work with. So this can include looking at how occupational therapy services help prevent or address that specific need and problem. Why is it important to address this need? What resources are required to address the problem? And just looking at the overall role of occupational therapy in the project. The next thing I could do is find something that I'm really passionate on and do my research on it. So after getting experience in the field and just becoming more familiar with the population I work with, I can do my own research on the different types of programs already being used and implemented within that population, and then I could figure out ways for improvement or modification for the setting I work in. And lastly, I can become a consultant. So again, after gaining experience in the field and figuring out what really interests me, I can collaborate with different organizations and help develop and implement programs for different populations. My second long-term goal and overall goal is that after graduating from my master's program, I will continue to advocate for the field of occupational therapy by participating in at least one event or activity yearly that brings awareness to the profession or addresses a specific issue in the field. Some activities and actions to achieve this long-term goal include continuing to be a member of OTAC and AYOTA. This will help me stay aware of the issues impacting OT, as well as help fund events for those individuals that are really at the forefront advocating for the field. The next step would be keeping up to date with laws and legislations. So I plan to make it a habit of every month getting on these websites and looking at the different laws impacting OT and the status of each legislation. The next step is taking action. So this includes me writing to Congress, networking with people, attending town hall meetings, or going to conferences, and just overall actively participating and using my voice. And lastly, I hope to encourage others, for example, my future coworkers or students that I come across with, on the importance of being a member of OTAC and AYOTA as well as advocating for the field. Thank you all for watching my leadership video.